Támuid chun bogu ará inis go dtíon chéad caintear eile. We're going to move on to the next speaker now. Agus Tam cóbradal as an deis fáilte a chur rah Manchán Magan, a well-known documentary maker and author. Tá Manchán díreach gana é camcuirt a dhéanamh an seo America agus i Canada fásta, agus ba mhór an honor agam bheith a láthair ag Cionamháin den na chuid Leachtaine de Aaron agus Manchán is just after coming back from a tour in America and also Canada, and I had the huge privilege of being able to go to one of his talks on Aaron agus He has written many books based on his travels in Africa, India and North America, writing occasionally for the Irish Times, and also has the podcast on the Almanac of Ireland, and I could go on and on. Two of his main best-selling books, Janam Taggarty, Gunmanic na Lohi Shaw and Mochud Rangana, Augusta Eichne, Augusta is a grunch in a Dini and Shaw, Fina Lohi Shaw, Marial, Goal, and some Ogum onto. I make reference to a lot of two of Manchán's major books here in my own classes here, as my students know and a lot of people around me know, because I have such an interest in them and love them so much. They're sitting here in my office right in front of me. I'll do a little plug for Three Dogs and the 32 Words for Field. They don't leave my side in my office. So go mila maigat a sort of in Shaw Manchán August to falcha war wrote.
Míle buchas Réaltín agus beg an kaint seo rá hangach. Now this conversation will be in both languages, but just I might start off in English. Just housekeeping first. I had a quick chance to look at the etymology of Dilisk or dulce, and it seems to have come from the Proto-Celtic and then from the Indo-European, a word like doiscus, which was to bloom or to green. And it's interesting just to tie into where I'm going to be talking about just the roots of the Irish language. A camera tusarag or more in the north that talk show is more in the north dumse of her Réaltín agus William. It's just like huge honor for me to be in the company of Réaltín and her dad William, because there's something going on in Ireland at the moment. Agus stoiling godigami de shinglair for we all seem to have a sense of this. Ní havon ag tarlú in éireann a chuir fud an dawan. Not only is this happening in Ireland, but all around the world. Tá sim lasta I dtíne, tá gríosa éigean I dtíne. There's a spark lit in people about their own culture. Agus cinnte bei William counts the ceann rodís, the major fad. William has been one of the pioneers in us rooting ourselves back to our traditions and realizing that there is just the wealth, the potency that is in our language, in our culture, in our way of life. And as I said, this is fortunately happening all over the world. Agus ní higam godíreach cem fá a bhfuil sé ag tarlú. I'm not quite certain why it's happening. Ach domsar a laid braham gur hála sé I think that there was a big thing that happened in the year 2019 when there hánig an antas na náisiúnta amach leis an ólas nua faoi ahrú a roide. So when the new information from the UN came in, it's about just how drastic the climate change impact was going to be. Agus an son leis galar on the pandemic and then with the pandemic the next year, all of our certainties were suddenly cast awry, and we were left sort of driftless, purposeless, not quite sure what we could depend on. So the Yenemer Irecht sheer our crana fertile. So we made an effort to lie back on our crana fertile, our stout oars, the oars of tradition. And as I say, it's dependent on people who were rooted in an area, but then who were incredibly observant and were going to look at the elements of the area and almost interpret them for us. And William has been doing this, and it was by entire accident that I came across William and Réaltín, but it wasn't. It's because Réaltín is out in the world always trying to make connections. And I happened to drop in for a quick second into Wild Strands, into William's cafe, just wanting to, I was going to grab something to eat and go again. And Réaltín spotted me and brought me, waylaid me and introduced me to William. And I realized this was a man who was making that link with all of that knowledge that was happening in the old days, and how we can really benefit from this for our psychological well-being, for our health well-being, and just for having a sense of who we are and where we came from and how we can live sustainably. And as I said, as Réaltín said, I'm just back from this 7-week tour of whatever 16 different cities in North America, 13 different states and 2 provinces. And at some different places, I was connecting up with indigenous tribes, with first groups or native people in America. And so many of them were telling me that in Ireland, you can begin to perhaps call yourself indigenous if you are living sustainably. And what William's entire message is, we have always lived sustainably. We have taken account of all of the natural features, of all of the natural foods and seasons and cycles that went, and used those to live in a very sustainable way until very recently. Peishkele ach gahaide mar a derach ban igiri Elhinney vorachu. Peishkele ach gahaide. Peishkele means pay, whatever scale, story, it is, whatever story it is. Ach gahaide means anyway. It's just a way of saying anyways. Agus, I should get on to this topic that I want to talk about today, is na lergus agus na smuintanu atá tacht the new insights that we're all getting into the importance of the Irish language and why it's relevant to us. And just to say that it's particularly nice to use a story by a phrase by Elhinney Vorachu, or Nell Purge, a great West Kerry woman who was so rooted to all of the Blasket Islanders who had gone to Springfield. Like when I was growing up in West Kerry, it was that Springfield was such a strong connection to us. We all knew people who every summer would come back from Springfield. And it was actually a woman, the biggest influence on my Irish language was a woman, it wasn't in Springfield, but she was in Chicago, from the Blasket Islands. Her name was Kate Kane. Her father was a great Blasket Islander. She was born on the mainland in Dunquin, but then retired in Mariach and in Ballingowl. And so I had that insight. But first I want to tell you my lineage. So the reason that I am interested and I'd like to talk to you about the Irish is basically to do with my great-grand uncle 4 generations back. So that's my great-great-great-great-grand uncle, who was Aegon O'Rahilly. And Aegon O'Rahilly was the last poet of the Bardic School, the last poet. He was born in 1670, died about 1730. And he was the last of the generations of poets who were schooled in the old ways of magic, the ways where they would believe that words had an impact on their surroundings. They could manifest things into the world. And that type of mindset came from the Druidic lore. So, you know, there was some form of shamanic priests, and I suppose Druids are the best name we can call them, who were in Ireland before St. Patrick. And when St. Patrick came, he said, like, I cannot have people going around who believe that they can manifest things through the power of words. So the Druids were banished and their power was given to poets. And they kept it alive, the tradition of poetry, until as I said, the 17th to the 18th century, when the English had banished it. And so Aegon O'Rahilly, my great-granduncle, 4 generations back, my great-great-great-great-granduncle, he was entitled to wear a cloak of crimson feathers because he had done all of the lore and all of the preparation to become Ard Illa, to become a high poet. And so he died out. But then my great-granduncle, Michael O'Rahilly, decided to try and bring back some of the knowledge he had in the 1890s and the 1910s. So my Theo O'Rahilly, my great-granduncle, founded the Irish Volunteers in 1913 and was one of the founders of the Gaeilge League of Conor na Gaeilge, with his 2 sisters, with Anya and Nell, and of course with the whole group of people who founded them. And really, you know, the Gaeilge League was the 1890s. The O'Rahilly was more involved from about 1904 on. But so I didn't know him either. But of course, my grandmother was deeply influenced by him. In 1916, when Theo O'Rahilly goes out to the GPO on this absolute mission, sort of suicide mission, he knew he couldn't come back alive because he was a leader in the old rule, the old order. Agus mar sin bhí sé chahabh a Shake Bradeen, he was wearing his lovely tweed jacket, agus bhí cleave lena hash, he had a sword by his side. Agus bhí sé fágáil slán den a bhain chéile. He was saying goodbye to his wife agus a cahar Mac and his four sons. Agus vi a van chéle ag umper ag an am. His wife was pregnant at the time. So vi sé lán chinta nach heice sé el van chéle ná a cahar Mac ná an lanavóg vi sovereign a chirid. That he wouldn't ever see his wife, he wouldn't see the four children, or he wouldn't see the young boy in the womb either. But for my grandmother, that was the moment that seared itself into her. And so she devoted the rest of her life to the Irish language and to fighting for Irish freedom. Sheila Humphreys was her name. She was vice president of Cumann Amon. She was a key figure in the Irish language revival, was awarded for her work by Conradh na Gaeilge, and did many years in prison and hunger strike as well. So it is their lineage that I am following in my interest in the Irish language. Ach, is toch in the rudig of Ireland ráliv, na ancienty fi an Gaeilge, the things that I'd like to talk to you about the Irish language. Now, Dírach, I mean, tá ar léirgus féin ag a chéinigin, all of us have a separate insight and a separate perspective on the language. Ach, dum san rud go griasan me, go spragan me, the thing that really incites me, now Dírach ke go harsas atá sé agus an kanga leis an shanam atá fós am. So Dírach ke go harsas atá sé, just how old it is, agus an kanga leis an shanam, and the notch or the link with the old ways that is still there. So, nura Saviotus, the Shan Viotus Nahair, in the old mythology of Ireland, it said that that the first people who came to Ireland in our mythology were Adra, and Adra means the ancient in Old Irish, Adra, and his sister Cesar, and their father Be. Now, Be is an interesting word, because Be, you know, Be, Ruder Be, anything at all. Be is sort of at all, but Be originally means the cosmos. So think of it, our mythology says that the father of the people who came here was the cosmos. It's basically an indigenous description of the beginning of time. They're saying we came from the stars, we came from the cosmos, and everything has been manifested out of that. Like, Cunas nach ditfang ra le tanga govil shin mar bonus lesh. How would you not fall in love with a language that is its foundation stone, and vunchloch atalesh, its foundation. Agus an rud a bhí sa Gaeilge agus sna seannacha agus sna fili nach an tóla seo a chamád bio. An príomhhaim, the main element, the main aim a bhí ag an seannachi that the storyteller had, agus an fila that the poet had, agus an drí, the druid before the poet, nach an tóla seo a chamád ivhaim, you know, to keep this information alive or in people's minds. And so in the Seanachas Mór is a collection of mythology that it's more than mythology, it's lore, it's almost it's the ancient laws as modified by the introduction of Christianity. So it's all of the collected wisdom of our people, which was passed down through on Baelidus, through on Litriach Bael, through the oral lore, until eventually, you know, it was written down when Christianity came. And in it, in the Seanachas Mór, there's a question that's asked: what is the preserving shrine? Like a shared atá geslishin, what that refers to is, what is the preserving shrine? Where is all of the knowledge gathered or collected up? And the answer it gives is, not hard, it is memory and what is preserved in it. So another thought go bhfuil an tolas atá a sin and sheer go túsama goléir lastig don chuine. But all of the memory is preserved within memory itself. But then it asks the question again. It says again, what is the preserving shrine? And it says, not hard, it is nature and what is preserved in it. Mar sin, an rud atá rá nisige gur ní hamháin go bhfuil sé sa meabhair chin, ní hamháin go bhfuil sé ag cuine an sochaí. Not only is it in the brain, not only is it a cuine an sochaí, not only is it in the mind of society, ach tá sé sa nádúr, tá sé sa talamh, tá sé sa timpeallacht. It's in nature, it's in land, it's in the environment. Now, if this idea of having all of the collected wisdom of a people in the oral tradition and then connected to the landscape and so preserved in the landscape, if that chimes bells with anyone, it's because it's the key element of any indigenous culture, particularly Aboriginal culture, where we know from songlines all of the information going back. So, you know, the Irish language seems to be having used in Ireland for for maybe 2,000 or 2,500 years. Ach sinna on on DNA atá leistig doinge ha sé timppel Ceravila or Ceravila Gale Mila Blian Dish. So our language has been spoken on this island for, it's hard to say before writing came, but it seems to be in 2,000 or 2,500 years it was used in this language in this island, possibly up to 3,000 years. But our DNA, we've been on this island, we're the Bronze Age people, we've been on this island for 4,500 years. And then we replaced people who came before us, the Neolithic people who built the wonderful tombs of Newgrange and Knowth and Douth. But the information so that we have for that 4,500 years is sort of preserved in the Shanachas, in this storytelling tradition that is all in Irish. And that storytelling tradition is rooted to the land. So that's how we can remember elements. And as I say, that goes back 4,500 years. In fact, it goes a lot longer. I'll talk about that in a little bit. But when we compare it to something like the song lines in Australia, the Aboriginal culture, their knowledge goes back 20,000, 25,000, even 30,000 years. They have information within their mythology that science is now proving is correct. And it's in that, it's contained within the song lines, within the stories that they tell themselves. So, tá mídna is a smuoin of an bhfuil an tolas go bhfuil leistír dar gultúr agus dar seanachas ó bhfuil ólas an tuairt ann. We're beginning to think now, beginning to ask ourselves, is some of this information that's preserved in our seanachas, in our old stories, could it be this old? Agus tugam rá hauntla de seo gcónaí. I give two examples of this always. Agus ceann bháin is san Albert a thug mo bharg sína na mi cheann bhar dom. One is in a proverb that my grandmother told me. And it's sail trí víl vúr, sail umid of on, sail trí umid sail and down. So sail trí víl vúr, sail umid of on, the life of three whales. Whales is the life of one growing ridge. And sail trí umid sail and down, the life of three growing ridges is the life of the world. So first bit, the life of three whales is the life of a growing ridge. A whale was considered to live 1,000 years. They actually live for about 100 or 200 years. But long ago, they were considered to live 1,000 years. So the proverb says that the life of three whales, that's 3,000 years, is the life of a growing ridge, of a cultivation ridge. Now certainly within the landscape in Ireland, most of the growing ridges in Ireland are famine beds, lazy beds, where potatoes were grown until the famine. And then either the people who were planted them died during the famine, or they were too weak to dig them up during the famine, or maybe they just smelt the blight, they smelt the rotted stalks and potatoes and realized there was no point in digging it up. But most of them, as I said, are just from the 1840s. But archaeologists are now finding growing ridges on the landscape that date back to 3,000 or 4,000 years. So it's interesting. Like, it could be a coincidence, but it's very remarkable and interesting that this proverb does claim that some of these cultivation ridges are 3,000 years old, where archaeology is now finding that is true. The second part of that phrase is sail trí víl vúr, sail and down, the life of three cultivation, sail trí umada, sail and down, the life of three cultivation ridges is the life of the world. So if a cultivation ridge is 3,000 years, then 3 threes is 9,000 years. And so the proverb says that the life of the world is 9,000 years old. And 9,000 years happens to be exactly when archaeologists and historians say the first major group of Irish people settled on the island 9,000 or 10,000 years ago. So it seems that our proverbs and our stories and our mindset do contain information that stretch back not just as far as the 2,000 and 2,500 years that we've been speaking this language, or the 4,000 or 4,500 years that the Bronze Age people with our lineage have been on the island, but right back to the very beginnings, to before the Neolithic people who built Newgrange, and right back to the hunter-gatherers. They've been passing on that information from culture to culture, from language to language, down to the present day. Agus sinna cúis which are córíochtnach na teangacha seo éon sean teangach go háir an Gaeilge a chéamhnú agus a chamáil bio. That's why it's so key to keep old languages, and particularly this language of ours, alive. Mar tá ólas ann nach bhfuil le fáil in áitin eile, because there's information in it that isn't to be had or easily found in other places. Agus an rud eile go chuige gionn orm go mór agus go bhrálam go digach daoine. The other thing that I'd love that it impacted me, and that I'd love that if other people knew, ná stádas an na maná, stádas na man Sushan Tanga. Now, the status of the female energy or women in this language of ours. Agus is toch an slí is simúla can fechant ná tríd an Gaeilge. One interesting way of exploring this is through the Gaeilge, the witch. The Gaeilge was the Gaeilge is sort of a cloaked woman or a hooded woman. So we now call it a witch, but it was a lot more than that. So a Gaeilge can be a nun, can be a Gaeilge. There's a nun will have a hooded woman, or even an old woman who's wearing the veil and it's got the cloak over. It can be a Gaeilge. But a Gaeilge really, the veil. It's what the veil is so much more than the veil. The veil is the magical cloak that's holding in the full essence or the full magic of the woman. And so you're never quite sure who she is. Is she a female or is she way beyond that? And just parts of it are being hidden. But it was the woman being on ban a Gaeilge go raibh an tolas and sean tolas faoin a livena agus na sean mó and a lice a kit. So it was the woman, the Gaeilge, who had the old herbal knowledge and the old knowledge about medicinal lore, along the Gaeilge, so much of it that is lost now. Ach bí go raibh isige the fion brat, she would have known about the brat, and the brat was a film on an animal's eye that was healed by a hare's blood. Or she would have known about the Schlaunon, which is a sty in the eye that's then cured with a poultice of bread and cat's urine. And they knew that the Frila Fridaid, which is the ferret's milk, was a cure for the whooping cough. And that the only way of milking a ferret was by using a prashlach, which is a gag or a rod in a ferret's mouth. Now, these are only like tiny elements of all that we realize is lost, of all of that information that these Gaeilge, or these powerful female figures, would have had. And what kills me is that although there is an enormous amount of culture and lore about the Irish language preserved in the Folklore Commission in Dublin and in other folklore archives around the country, so much of the women's knowledge has been lost because either the men didn't think to ask it or the women were keeping it to themselves. But we can see just how ancient the role of the female, of the woman, the Gaeilge was. She was almost a representative of the earth goddess, of the matriarch. We can see from old, in a particular poem that goes back, it's sort of in Middle Irish, and it goes, Dúr bheadh na farige mór na Gaeilge cinne glas ba bhise in warning og. So when she was asked once how old was the Gaeilge, how old was this knowledge that she preserved in her mind, she says, "Dúr bhí an farige mór in the Gaeilge chunnig glas." The time when the Great Sea was this grey mossy wood. Bhí mise im bhuarnig og. I was a young girl. So what she's saying is the time that the Great Ocean, that the Atlantic Ocean was a forest, I was young. Now, as we know, the Atlantic Ocean was once a forest. Like, what's interesting is we're here now, me here now on the west coast of Ireland, knowing that we have the exact same geology, the exact same rocks as they do over in on the Appalachian Way, over on the east coast of America, because we were once the same continent before Pelagia, before the continent broke up and created the Atlantic Ocean. But it could easily be a coincidence, but it's an uncanny one that the very words that the female Gaeilge, who was a representative of the mother goddess, the original matriarch, the original spirit that animated all people before we separated into different tribes, that the Gaeilge claims she's as old as before the Atlantic Ocean was ever created, when there was still a forest there. It's beautiful, it's resonant. It doesn't make scientific sense, and it's hard to get our historical minds around it. But this is the sort of thing, this is the sort of knowledge that we could use by tapping into the Irish language. So we could sort of widen our horizons. Gedigamid Shli Umlawn Ella Contact Tishkent and Downshire. We could come across an entire different way to understand the world. Agus Gymryd da memi se fechant rud atá có cwng slí áirithe agus có preve in éanaid bháin agus an bhilgam. So céceap a who'd have thought the fechant rud atá có cwng, looking at something that's so narrow, agus atá preve in éanaid bháin, that's so rooted, that's so connected in one place, gevertimish in an tishkend larnach farsing oil down, that we can get such a wide and central view of the world. Ach sin mar atá, nor a hogan to ein rud arsa. But this is just how it is when you take anything that's truly ancient, agus gin into analyse, agus a new that you analyze or that you look at. So, an rud domsa go bhfuil so cho simúl go the spáin díoch cé go farsing is atá on Gaeilge. One thing for me that shows just quite how incredibly expansive and wide the Irish language is na nascan a gléir atá ag an Gaeilge agus leis an Induis no culture in India. So is all of the connections between Irish and Hindu or Hindi or Sanskrit or the culture of India. Agus ní cheapfá go méach is teanga beagí seo atá imol chosta iarthar na Hórdopa. This is a language that's right on the very edge of the west coast of Ireland, of Europe. Conasimech kanga le culture atá an David fad. How would it have such a connection with a culture that's far away in the Far East? Fechmi de sin again second. Ach dúis begarting fechend a quid dus na kangal. So fechmi de seo again second. We'll look at this in a second. Ach dúis begarting fechend a quid dus na kangal atá. First, we should have a look at some of the connections, the explorations, the interactions that are there. Agus is stocha an príomhrod na beidir na focail. Maybe the main thing is the words. Because few má hogamid an focail drew. Even if we take the word for drew is what the word drew or dree. This is the word that is the root of the English druid. And drew seems to mean drew is an oak. It's connected to an oak. And then, so druid is from drew and then vid. Vid means, vid is like to see or vedas, you know, so Veda and Veda is the same Irish root and Sanskrit root. They have the same Indo-European root. And what they mean is learning or knowledge. So idus, you know, rein on idachas or kama idusianav is education. Veda is knowledge. The Vedas in India, it's the same root. It's basically the same word, Ida and Veda. And so Dhru Ved means Dhru. Now, the etymology of Dhru is contested, but it seems the most likely one is it seems to be Dhru is oak, and then Vid is from Veda, from knowledge, or Idus, from accessing knowledge. So it was almost the figure who could access knowledge through the oak tree. And Paisigan Galeir and Ishgarev, until Olas atá Gwyn Fini Celtic, the only clear information we have about the Celts, whether the Celts were a culture or a people is still debated. They were definitely a culture. Whether they were also a people is not so certain. Ach, they on Rudganen and Gaderan Caesar, Gaderan Julius Caesar, Augustine Alex, Pliny Ling Fuha. The thing that Julius Caesar and Pliny tells us about them is that they worshipped in nematons, and nematons, these sacred temples in the forest made of oak trees, it seems. So the oak was the key tree, the key element for the spiritual connection of the people who came, who were in Ireland before the arrival of St. Patrick, of Christianity. And so Drew even makes it into the word of the Druid, Druvid. But that Drew is, as I said, it's found in Irish, but it's also found in Sanskrit culture. And even that word nematon was the name of the grove of trees that the pre-Christian people, the pagan people, used to worship in. And nematon then became the word for sacred, and it's sort of rooted in the word neoth today for the saint. So we have that link going right back to the beginning. And then even the word like brehev means judge, but it comes from bre, and bre means mantras, basically. It's the Sanskrit word mantra. Bre, and then bre of, and then bre is the mantra. And again, it seems of is either just an Irish participle that would be put on it. So the brehev, the judge or the key figure of learning, was actually the master of mantras. They were the same figure in Irish. And so, like, I suppose the equivalent of the brehev in Hindu culture would have been the Brahmin. The brehev and the Brahmin, it's the same word. It has the same lineage. And then our noble figure in Ireland was called the Ara. So that's why, an Ara Ganohi Achtrach. An Ara means a minister in Irish. So prime minister is on Príomh Ada, if we said it, except we say Taoiseach, but the Ara is minister. And Aria is the same linguistic root, and again, it's the same word, just with a 1,000 years of change gone into it, with area, which is the noble figure in Hindu culture or in Sanskrit culture. But why? Why would we have these same words? Why would our prime story, our mythological story, the Táin Bó Cúailnge, be about cattle, and the prime story of the Hindu culture, the Mahabharata, also be about cattle? Why would our, as I say, our judges, why would our legal system be so similar, the old Brehon system be so similar with the system in India? And it's because Tagamid ó an Préamh Céanna, because we all came from the same root, agus just dusk homer schlitte diffrúda. We all panned out different ways. Agus few fecamide sin is an sim atá ag an cultúr seo agus cultúr na India is the bah in the cows. We even see this in the interest that our culture and the Indian culture have in cattle. Agus tugam shigoni on sampla the sun now. I always give the example of that is the clearest example of the role that the cow played in Irish tradition is the god Bowen. The god Bowen was a mother goddess. She was actually in the form of a cow, so she nourished her people with her life-giving milk. Agus vishi ividum sa timpelach, vishi le fekal sa timpelach, the vida on awan the Boyne. So she was seen in the landscape in the form of the river Boyne. So Bowen, agus an brí a vile Bowen, the meaning that Bowen had, that this mother goddess who nourished her people with her life-giving milk, just as her representative in the landscape, the Boyne River, nourished its people in both sides of Meath and Louth and Kildare, nourished its people with their life-giving waters. The meaning of Bowen was Bo was a cow, and un or Bo in, which was white or clear. But it's the same way with Fionn McCool. Fionn means white or clear or fair-haired, but it also means transparent. It means being able to see clearly through. So not only was Fionn fair-haired, but Fionn had the ability to access knowledge, to see through the veil and access knowledge, which is how this other meaning that Fionn has, it's transparency. So Bowen, a cow of transparency, or a cow who could access the knowledge on the other side. And she is not only is she represented in the landscape in the Boyne River, but she shines up. She's so radiant that she shines up into the night sky to create the Milky Way. And the Irish for the Milky Way is Bealach na Bó Finne, the way of the white cow. So we have this mother goddess representing the land by the Boyne River, shining up to create the Boyne, to create the Milky Way. And then we can go a very different direction with this Bowen, because the Bowen, the mother goddess, who is based on the idea of the cow, is the exact same god or deity that you find over in India, but called Govinda. Now, Govinda is another form of Krishna. And Go is just Bo. Go is the Sanskrit for cow. Bo is the Irish for cow. Vinda, we've already looked at Vinda again. It's connected to Veda. Vinda means seeker of knowledge, or finder. So we have the Bowen, who's the cow who can see clearly through and access knowledge, and the Govinda, the cow who's the seeker of knowledge. Siad an dia canon chéanna atá ann ach it is the exact same God there, but in two different elements of the content. Mar sé seohiad an Severus atá le fáil mai dírími de rascan an tanga seohanis. This is part of the richness that is now to be had, but if we do turn back on the Irish language. Ag ann gwil gachrid mich inte agus in Ivray, at a time where everything is uncertain and everything is in a bit of disarray. Tá an féidirach seo a gcuin, we have this possibility chun ceangal isteach go tuiscint a bhí ar an domhan cían ársa agus tá go hiomlán sever. We have this opportunity to link back into this view of the world that's really ancient and incredibly nourishing. Agus William a kaint níos luithe, níos tuisce faoi an tolas atá le fáil ar an costa. And William talking earlier about the knowledge that's to be found at the coast. Cuireann sé a gcuinedom rud a dhéanme in Nirig. It brings to mind something I did last year. Chuame con kainte le hiascarí host to muo tír chunel agus na Gaeilge. So I went to talk with fishermen on the coast of Donegal, of Mayo, and of Galway. Agus chuirsaí ceistóra faoin na focail gur thug an hósta, gur thug beocht don hósta, agus gur thug tuiscint ar le doing Mon and Hosta. So I asked them for words that gave a particular insight to the practices and ways of life along the coastline of Donegal, of Mayo, and Galway. Agus bhailig me ráchiad Craig a focal, I collected 250 words. Agus Yenis Tafford, dus na hioscuri, ik tuaird minu dum, dus na focal show. So I made a record of an audio recording of the fishermen explaining these words. Agus tashi chukale Mahi of Iderleen. These are all on my website at mancán.com. 250 words, audio files of the fishermen, short audio files, 1 or 2 minutes long, of the fishermen explaining the words. Words like muirla. Muirla was a word from Guidor, and it means chewing small crabs and then spitting them out into the sea as bait to attract fish to a boat. Muirla. Or tafel. Tafel means a calmness between two changes of falling or ebbing tide. Hana sé sin ó Mayo stoilm. That came from Mayo. And tafel, so it's the unsteady water when the currents meet and they're about to change direction. So, you know, at that time, and the Gutuban ta on Tida Nav Chorum. Suddenly there is this unsteadiness to do with the wave. Or Buraita. Buraita is a reef. It's a reef that has a kelp forest growing on it, and that they're always mangachi agus balchi la foilaun. So this is a Connemara word in particular, Buraita, spelled B-R-A-I-T-E. And it's where the reef, as I said, where the kelp forest is there, and you'll always find mungachi, pollocks and ballon wrasse to be found there. So the likes of me can look out in the harbour in Connemara and I won't see anything at all. But the fishermen know where the Buraita are, where these hidden areas of kelp are, which will always have an abundance of fish. So there is, as I said, as William was making reference to, someone who knows the ways of the coastline never goes hungry. There's always plenty of food there. You always know exactly which particular seaweed is, which rock it is, and which the best time to pick it are. Tá tolas sugalaid aun. Or fucalella gurvalias na caliantoracht. Another word I gather was caliantoracht. And caliantoracht is forecasting the weather by noticing natural phenomena. Nish filáthar is féidirling bra tour na Hampshire. At the moment, we can depend entirely on the weather forecast. Ach déach éanrod tarlú again moment. Anything could happen at any moment. Leis an Iderleen lo córis eile atá buintach leis an riomhra. With the Iderleen, with the internet or other connections, other systems connected to computers. Agus an son, bheith an tolas seo faoi caliantoracht on the háchtach. Then information about this caliantoracht, about being able to tell the weather by noticing natural phenomenon, would become incredibly important. Agus socha an rud eile, ní hamháin go practicúil agus ní hamháin I déirmí stare atá sé táchtach chun tacht I rais I discint an Gaeilge go ríis. So not only in terms of star, in terms of history, no, in terms of practical information about our surroundings, not only these elements is it important to go back to the Irish language, ach I dare me spiridalta come up, but in spiritual elements too. Where tugan an Gaeilge, agus tugan éan sean cultúr, agus éan sean tanga, nairida. The Irish language and any old culture or own language gives us an understanding into the spiritual, into the wider world that is really important at a time of such uncertainty. And one way I like to look at this is the difference between counter and altar. So counter is the Irish for a place or locality. And the opposite of counter, which is now forgotten by a lot of people now, is altar. So if counter is this region, this district, this place, altar is the other world, the other realm, the place beyond. And it was always understood that there was only ever a thin veil between counter and altar. So tá míad na néise counter, we are now in counter, at least like I presume we're in counter. But like altar is just nearby. It's just beyond, just between, just below. Agus a goni vi dina in aun dul o chean go chean ella. There were always entities or beings who could pass from one to the other, from counter to altar. So like Pukin means a supernatural covering that allows otherworldly beings appear invisible in this world. Pukin. It can also mean like a blindfold, of course, and a goat muzzle, and a tin visor for putting over a thieving cow's eyes. But it did have this sense that it gave this hint that there were always entities. You could slip from counter to altar, from this world to the other world. And I remember one of the words that a fisherman in the Lough Lene on Vudaid, the Mullet Peninsula, told me in Mayo was cabla. And cabla means spirit voices that are heard in the distance at sea on calm nights. And he had heard this cabla, or cablu as he pronounced it, quite often. He'd only heard it actually last time, about 2 years before Christmas time. And it was a recognition that any liminal area, particularly the coastline, has access to other worlds at it. And so if you're on the shore at night, according to Pádraig Ó Murchú, one of the people who I collected words from, he says, be very careful, because the other world, the wider world, is just there, always reaching out to us. And in fact, it's so interesting that this idea of there being other places beyond our senses, beyond what we smell or see or sense or hear, that the Irish language is so comfortable with these other realms beyond, is tying in exactly with the latest understandings of quantum physics, which are saying that the world is 95% made up of dark matter and dark energy. So not only is it interesting in terms of science, that this comfort that the Irish language has always had with with things that are not entirely there, actually that is exactly what the latest understanding of quantum physics is. But it also gives us this great soifness, this great soothing and comfort to know that there are places that we can escape to. Mar den braille on tar school, it's liminal, it's on the threshold, on the edge. There was a lovely word in Irish, which is, there were so many different meanings for it. So like skim. So skim can mean like a sprinkling of tiny particles, like dust on a mantelpiece, or even whitewash on a wall. But skim also meant a fairy film that covered the land in the early morning, like a vague mist that seemed to be connected with the other world. And skim can mean a magical vision, and skim can mean succumbing to the supernatural world through sleep. Skim. So tasha onehemul gur gwilisagwini agoni gwilin federach cha aun gur fedig elu gudi down ella. It's lovely to know that there is this knowledge, that we always had this ability in our culture, that we were able to escape from the hardship by through sleep, by going into other worlds. And that's just a modern way of what a psychologist or a doctor would say, the healing elements of sleep, how it's so important. So is she chin the ruddy gur federling commod congrach doing agus re am of will gehomlon nav hinte agus mees hooker. These are the things that we can cling on to in a time of such uncertainty, of such difficulty in a way. Stop him. I should just I should just say I gathered a load of those words, or about 40 or 50 of those C words, into another little handmade book called C Tamagotchi. Agus Yemis Lauer L actually comma ta Kervile chi head focal character dinner renewal. There are 4,300 words to describe someone's character in Irish. Now, most of us have about 12,000 words in our entire vocabulary. Shakespeare used 30,000 words in his all of his works, in all of his works. But the Irish language has 4,300 words just to describe someone's character. Now, most of them, I have to say, are negative, and most of them, it seems, were used by other women when they were weaving or gathering seaweed or gathering silk. But I'd love to see, do I have the book? I do. So I got these 4,300 words from a book published by Cushcane called Céan Sorte, Mascra Animnacha Hinalacha Dina by Tommaso Fiachan, a brilliant book, 4,300 words. And a few years ago, I did a thing in the Kennedy Center in Washington, D.C., where I was giving away some of these words. In Leona, and then this year, we gathered about 40 or 50 of those words to make a little handmade book called Dal na Gron, the nasty words for people. Focalernos mosach, big-bottomed, big-thighed person or animal. No scroshta, a sluggard, a tramp, a layabout. No shramloy, an untidy, bedraggled person, a careless slapdash worker, or ludder, a soft, flabby person, a slovenly person or a miry place. Scrata, a lazy person, a ragamuffin, a listless, useless person, or a worthless thing. Or lutta, a heavy, sluggish person, a clumsy child, or a long old tidy strip. That's the reason we need to keep this language alive, because we need to keep these 4,300 words that we can insult people. What would we do if we didn't have these words? Does anybody have a question, or or do you want clarity on any of the rambling I've done?
Gur maigad Manachán Archimaginish and will Keshner be Ogov.
Réaltín.
Yeah, John, go for it.
Yeah, got a meal, Monica. I was smiling during a lot of your smallest stories because a group of us struggled with the invasions last year, and many times I was discouraged by the layers of complication, the use of magic numbers like 300, 3,000. And I saw so many connections and what you were saying. Could you please comment on any connections with the invasions?
Yeah, so it's really hard. So we know our mythology, it's a mythological account. And so it's so hard for our rational brains to get our mind around what mythology is. We need to be asking the indigenous people in where you are in North America to re-explain mythology to us. Mythology has enormous wisdom and knowledge in it, but it's not the sort of rational knowledge that we're used to. And we're used to history being this series of dates, these series of rational linear dates. And that's the last thing mythology has in it. But that's all our brains get. So somehow there is bigger knowledge within this mythology, within all of these crazy accounts of who came and when, and we need to decipher it. And we can't use our logical brains to decipher it. Either we need to just feel into it, or we need to see, is there a bigger knowledge, or we need to sit in these places. Like when I met on the last 7 weeks, different Native American people, they're telling me, Manchán, you need to go out into these areas and you need to sit in them, in the, the key hill, the sites of Rathcroghan or Ishnach or Skellig or wherever, anywhere in Ireland is actually sacred land, and sit in them. But then we sit in them, but how do we know that we're not just, it's just a jumble, it's not just New Age make-believe that is coming into us? That's the hard thing. And of course, a lot of it is New Age make-believe. A lot of what I spout is New Age make-believe, but there's also key elements of wisdom within it. So I think, like, it's interesting for me that all of the accounts say that we came from the south. And then all of the anthropological and archaeological history say we came from the south. But we know we would have come from the south because we're coming after the last ice age, and even between ice ages, we're always coming from the warmer climes up to the north. And just like in Game of Thrones, the darkness is in the north. But even a word like we're Anya, like everything goes back. So I have a new book coming out in September called Listen to the Land Speaks. And I didn't mean it to be about this, but it is all just about the goddess, because I was going to write a book about the land. But you get rid of Cuchulainn and Finn McCool, or you get rid of some of those, the ridiculous characters, even in the invasions. There's always a key female at the bottom of it. And Anya is a key woman. And Anya means brightness or beauty, and she's basically, it seems to be the representative of the sun. The sun, and Anya always comes from the south and moves north. Everything comes from the south and moves north, except the darker forces of winter and the Gaeilge, which, tamp down on the brightness, rightly so, in winter, so that it can be reborn again. But yeah, so like if you ask me to pinpoint one element of the invasions, I'm stuck, because we can't pinpoint. We need to we can't pinpoint a point in a myth. We need to throw ourselves into the wave and just see rise and sometimes the surf will just churn us back up, and we'll be and probably every day we might have a different interpretation of it. But what we do know is there is wisdom in the mythology. We just aren't quite sure how to uncode it yet. And so you have all of us and the likes of me, stabbing at it with our awkward blind fingers, trying to root out some bit of knowledge. But I think the key element is, if we look at the myths, you'll find there is a goddess energy, there is a female consciousness, a matriarchal idea at the heart of so much of it, even if you have loads of male characters dumped on top of them. And the other thing is that it seems to suggest that because of the myths are to be found, the same myths are to be found in every other culture, it chimes back to the idea that this is knowledge that goes way, way back before the beginnings of Ireland, back before 5,000 years, 10,000 years, to 20,000 years, and even like 25,000 years. So, you know, but it has been misinterpreted so many times. The only reason we have these accounts is because they were written down by Christian monks who wanted to debase them. And also then they were translated in the late 19th century by the likes of my cousin T.F. O'Reilly, who were males in a 19th century patriarchal, misogynistic attitude. So they have been corrupted so many times by the missionaries, by the Christians, by the 19th century translators, and then by us with our 21st century conventions and hang-ups. So I have no clear information, but I think, yeah, I have no more to say.
My God. To wrench cash no ogum sa busket chat and shodich cheglum aleu ama if I can get it. Oh, Tadinya Agiri lista did a chudge lorhe emulsion or CEO so good.
It's not Gaeilge, yeah. Manchán.com, yeah.
Yeah, so someone's asked for the list of the books there, and they will be on mannequin.com online. If you're looking for them, I think it was Maureen who asked that. Arish to Con Ella Ugumanshaw. Oh, there are no neo-pagans, mostly in North America, who consider themselves modern-day Druids, but the majority are uninterested in learning Gaeilge. In addition to learning Gaeilge, what might be some of the best sources, authors, and teachers to connect today with the Druidic spiritual teachings of long ago? Apart from yourself, maybe that is.
Yeah, but I'm so blind and I'm so beginning. It's such a difficult field because, and I think I've grown more patient even the last 2 months. So, you know, there's a lot of, as you say, you know, New Age Druids or New Age people taking over the hills in Ireland and redoing festivals and redoing ceremonies. And a lot of it, and you know, there's a lot on the internet from American and English and Scottish and Irish sites. And a lot of it is inaccurate. It's just make-believe, you know, it's people on ego trips. And a lot of probably what's in my books is bits that is very inaccurate, and possibly I'm on an ego trip as well. But how are we going to, but the reason I've got more patience is because people have told me we need to allow for that. When a culture, a traumatized post-colonial culture reconnects with itself, and when so much of what's important has been lost, you are going to have some people making it up, and you need to allow all of that come up, and then the chaff to be blown away and the important stuff to linger. But I mean, so I can't point to any book that has really impressed me so far. I just see in the last maybe 5 years, people are beginning to explore these things by basing everything, using all of the value information that the archaeologists and historians are giving us, but then going into the mythology and daring to feel our way through the uncertainty, the murky uncertainty of the mythology, to see, is there some more things that we can connect to what the historians and archaeologists are saying? Because when a historian and archaeologist is in a university system, they just cannot, you know, they will be laughed out of court if they try and make any of these leaps. So there was one, what is his name? Mike Bailey. He was an esteemed dendrologist in Queen's University. He wrote brilliantly about connecting dendrology and the study of early radiocarbon dating with chiming it with particular events in myths in Cuchulainn and things, and how the arrival of comets might have been represented by the likes of Lough, the god of light or of crafts. So Mike Bailey would be someone. And again, when you're reading any of these books, what do? You need to see which elements chime with you and which don't, because Mike Bailey, some of his theories are going to be disproved, some might be proved correct, but it's very hard to know. So there's no more. I mean, yeah.
Ceist eile an seo just aber sin galore ceis na fragrathe agad. An bhfuil stubbar san Gaeilge ag teacht arás trí bhean difriúil mar hampla oideachas na main sóisialta is riile agus cad é an main is fearr.
Se. So braham kinte go bhfuil beocht dúnta tacht sa Gaeilge trí áitin ashtacha and ish. So I really feel that there is this new revival in the Irish language through interesting, unusual sources. Mar dúirtu na man sosialta beidir áran agus filiocht agus mar sin de through poetry and songs. Ach an rud is true of Elias is bronin on áit go bhfuil an éag is mó tacht. The biggest decline is happening in the Gaeltacht. Agus siad na Gaeltachtaí faoin sian tanga, siad na Gaeltacht an áit go bhfuil an severas go léir bailithe cnosa. So it is in the Gaeltacht, in the Irish-speaking areas where all of the immense richness of the language is concentrated, and those are declining. And no matter how many of us try and speak Irish outside the Gaeltacht or try and do things on social media or in books, they're only going to be a thin, diluted ghost version of actually what needs to be kept alive is in the Gaeltachtaí. So yeah, vein tam dochasach, tam untach dochasach fin lá ruddy ach a gram cean an nor ekem on tregent agus on dihu tá tarlu I cuidas na háitin seo. When I see some of the decline that's happening in Elms the Gaeltacht and basically the spoken language, it's worrying.
Yeah. Intuition Gramaiga Stephen to ga ceistel an seo just teanga chosint gan villages a chosint an bhfuil si teanga gan chosper. Sean ceiste has a chat.
On our fad. Yeah, so I mean near Higamer cad denna leis an béilid this the father. We didn't really know what we should do with the béilid this with the literature oral literature for a long time. Vi lauer bioga scoil agus múnachar scoil, so we had little children's books and it was learnt at school, but it didn't have any relevance to our modern world. Ach má tá daoine inis chun a échant an bhiotas. If people are going to reappraise the mythology and realize that actually this has incredibly relevant messages for our time. And in Glasgainach, every single townland in Ireland is a story about the Glasgainach, about the cow who the cow who gave all of her milk, who fed the whole community with her life-giving milk. And until one day a man came along, a traveling man, an outsider man came along, and he said to the cow, he said to the community, I bet you I have a vessel that your Glasgainach could never fill. So the Glasgainach is an analogy, a metaphor for the bounty and endless supply of food and love and sustenance that comes from nature. And then the outside man comes along and he says, I have a vessel that cow can't fill. And of course the community thinks this is impossible. Nature will always give unlimitedness, but of course the man comes along with his sieve. And of course the cow milks, he milks the cow into the sieve, and he milks and he milks and he milks, and all of the endless supply of the milk goes through the sieve until eventually there's only blood coming out of the udders of the cow, and she dies. But she doesn't, because she's a magical cow. She comes back alive again, but she picks up her bones and her skin and leaves humanity. And what it is, it's a story about respecting nature and living in a sustainable way and not exploiting the land. Ach tá irid sin scéalta le stig de miotas na Gaeilge, miotas cultúr na hÉireann go bhfuil cotácht leis sin, agus má hagamid slí chun iad échant I slí nua go bhfuil buinte leis an saoil nuahiseach Marashia the story. So there are so many stories like that do have direct relevance to our modern day. And if we find ways of retelling these stories, and particularly sifting aside the adventure stories, the later adventure stories of Finn McCool and Cuchulainn, and find beneath them these female goddess stories that have sustenance and love and warmth for us forevermore, then the stories will come naturally. Then you'll have every singer, every storyteller, every poet wanting to tell these stories, because they're the stories of transcendence, they're the stories of resilience, they're the stories of reconnecting in a loving way with our planet again and with the community and society.
Agus gur maigat de Gregory as op den cheisian agus Stephen agus sinam Sarah den cheisina Ella. Kionawine Ella, would you say that Irish is closer to Sanskrit than other Indo-European languages? If so, would that be partly because of isolation?
Yeah, yeah, exactly. You nailed it. Because it's weird me saying that Irish has a strong link to Sanskrit when we are all Indo-European language. So we all came from the exact same roots. So you can't, there's nothing exceptional in the way of Irish versus, you know, German or Romanian or French, except, or Scandinavian, or like a Swedish, except that, as you said, isolation. So we all came from the same roots, Indo-European language. But because Ireland was on the very west and India was on the very east, and the central area had so many new groups, the Visigoths, the Vandals, the Huns coming in and intermingling, so which put so much more different influences on those Indo-European languages in the center. So it just happens, just like if you drop a agus begna circular tachma, if you throw a stone into a pond and the radiant lines, the lines will radiate out in circles. It's the same, the Indo-European language, you can imagine that culture in the center, and then at the very edges, the radiant line is still sort of more or less intact, and they are Irish and India. Yeah, I think that's the only logical reason for why so many elements, as I said, the culture, the ruling system, the stories, the words, the gods in Ireland and India are so akin. And the great book on this has been written in 1973 by Miles Dillon called Celts and Aryans. You'll find it in libraries. He outlines it all.
To make our current scalan and agus ní heglum. Oh, Deirdre. Monica.
Oh, did I lose him?
No, go ahead.
Is he left? It's a quick comment, and it's to thank you because you've answered a question I've had this last week about Gaeilge. I'm not perhaps pronouncing it correctly. Purely genealogical, trying to find out about McInerney roots in Southwest Clare. I find a Luke McInerney in Dublin who's published a paper, lots of papers, and he directs me, look at the one about the curses on the McInerneys. And it was a story collected in East Clare in 1830, written half in English, half in Irish. The curses are all in Irish, and the curses were given by a young nun. And the nun is identified as a Gaeilge. And I'm an Irish language learner at a very early stage, and I'm thinking, wait a second, a witch? A nun is a witch? What is this about? She lays these curses on each of the 4 branches of the family, and they're giant curses. And one of the recipients goes to the bishop at some time later and says, please find, get rid of the curses for me. And the bishop says, or it was another church, it says, oh, the nun, if a curse was done this way, sorry, there's nothing I can do. And I'm thinking, wait a second, that's not Catholic teaching. And I realized, of course, that there had to be a connection with this larger female power that you're talking about. And that this is one of those examples of a story where the Christian kind of overlay is on top of something else. I just had to say thank you and share that little brief story with you.
It's so beautiful. And I wonder, is this happening? Like, I just see in the last 5 years, even the last year, the amount of people who are suddenly coming to realizations about female power that was right under their noses, but they never, we just never woke up to it before. But so I live in Collinstown here, which in Irish in Westmeath is Bailin na Gaeilge. And Bailin na Gaeilge, the town of the witches, or of the wise women, or of the nuns. And it's said that there was a nunnery out on the island here in maybe the 10th or 11th century, but that's not certain. In fact, it seems that there was a group of shamanic women who lived, because just down the road here is Sliabh na Gaeilge, which is clearly the Lough Lene, the hill of the witch, the wise, the goddess woman, like connected to the same Gaeilge, which is found in the Mourne Mountains. Like, the Gaeilge is absolutely vital. What was the other thing? Oh yeah, like, wells, holy wells are a Christian thing we think of, but we know that we look at the old mythology and all it has is stories of St. Patrick and all the other saints seining wells, which was, Christianizing wells. And what the wells were originally all places of female worship. The well was basically a vulva or a vagina. It was an orifice into the female goddess. And the church was well aware of this, even up until the 19th, 20th century. And so, some clever priests would try and Christianize it, but they didn't like too much going on. They didn't like people going to the well alone to worship. They were quite happy if a little Christian ritual happened there on the patron day. but everyone was petrified of people going back to the female power. Almost, even if they didn't know it logically, it's an instinctive thing. You know, there's only possibly been 2,000 years of this male power, and everyone knew at some point it was going to topple. And again, you talk to any of the native indigenous groups, they all say there was a time of the buffalo and a time of the horse, and the female time is rising. So it's no surprise that but your observation is a beautiful one. I'm going to take that. That's gorgeous. Yeah. Of course, why would, and because like, not only is the Gaeilge saying she's female, she's powerful, but also she is acting as the filla or the druid. She is saying words, and words were always more powerful. So if you look in any of the Táin Bó Cúailnge, the king never acts without consulting with either the poet or with one of these goddesses. The Táin Bó Cúailnge is great with some of the great female figures who suddenly appear and tell the men what's going to happen. So, you know, and the filla, the poet, was really cross, you know, gender. He was cross, he wasn't even fully physical, but words. So a bishop or a king would always be frightened of words that were said in a poetic, incantatory way, because they had power. So, míle buíochas, Deirdre, thank you.
Okay, just question why Naila, but go right. Patrick and I Shantosa.
I was very interested in the proverb about the seal. And I know one of the phrases was seal on Darwin about the cultivation ridges. And where could I find that whole Seanachal written down so I could learn it?
Yeah, if I have time, I can write into the notes. It's on my book. It's in my book. And Seamus Helferty, the great archaeologist who discovered the Cade of Fields, or as he explored it up in Mayo, he wrote it too. Now I'll write it just quickly here, and then you can keep it. So it's about the whale, and it goes sail chi veal vor meal. Actually, Réaltín will probably remember it, and she'll have it written down anyway. Sail chi veal vor sail umida avoin sail chi umida sail and down. Sail and down. There you go. And a meal moor is a whale, but a meal just means an animal. So meal togue is a small animal, which is a midge. Meal moor is a big animal, which is a whale. There's quite a few other meals that it's a lovely way. There's a lovely Irish has a lovely way of breaking words down into elements of nature down into simple observational words. Yeah.
And you said it was in your book. Which book?
Oh, it's in 32 words for field. Did you see it there in the chat where I wrote it there?
Yeah. But I that's one of the books I have, so I'll look at it in the book too.
Oh yeah, it's on page, I think 3 or 4. It's in the first chapter. And if anyone wants, last week, as I said, I just came back less than a week ago, and I left some books in a shop in, where is it, in Milwaukee, in Tralee Imports in Milwaukee. So if you don't want to, because the postage can be terrible if you're getting them from Ireland, but Tralee Imports should have a few copies. Yeah.
Perfect. Gur míle maigad. Sin sílim sin na ceisna go a leg, agus sílim go sin, that's all we have time for basically. Okay, Kathleen, go.
Okay, I'll be quick. Okay, so I got to see you in Kingston, New York, and I just wish everyone in here could smell the bread and be part of making the butter. You will carry that, I will carry that with me to the grave. That was a wonderful, I hope you keep doing that. And you probably get tired of doing it, but it was really wonderful that I was in a room that made butter and I smelled bread all day, and my vegan friends would go like, oh, butter, but it was wonderful. And I just want to thank you. And I would like to know more about the rest of the whole poem of Imogen. Imogen, am I saying it correctly? Because I am kind of loving the invasions and the fact that he got everybody on the land with his. So how do you find the whole thing, the whole poem of Imogen?
So thank you, Kathleen, Mavila Buechas, for that. There's about 2 or 3 different poems of Armageddon's incantation at the beginning, and there's many beautiful translations online. So if you just put Armageddon into the internet, you'll come across some gorgeous translations of it, the bread. And Yeah, so exactly, and I will be bringing that series out. I mean, my Ironic Zine, my show, back to the west coast of the States, but I probably won't be. It killed me that I didn't get to Springfield, but
It should kill you that you didn't get to Springfield. Yes, but thank you, Gora Mahagat. It was a wonderful day, and it was a joy.
But you know, I was on Radio na Gaeltacht before I went, and I told the listeners in West Kerry, I said the only place I want to go on this tour is to Springfield, Mass, because just my whole upbringing in West Kerry was everything about Springfield and the excitement in summer when they'd come back. But unfortunately, it didn't work out on this time. But I'll be there for some other reason, definitely.
Okay, Gora Mahagat.
Welcome.
All right, Akarja, Manachan Gurmila Mygut, Asukt and Sign Olishan, even caps. Irish language and the power of women, it can't go wrong. So, Kaimira growing my own Saltish, and I really, really enjoyed it. And it encapsulates really a lot of the reasons why I am so passionate and love the Irish language itself, because of the secrets and the nuances that the language holds to Irish culture that you just do not get across when it's anglicised and in English. And that is the main reason, and one of the main reasons why we should hold it very close to us, and why we should preserve it and promote it as a huge part of our identity, and an integral role in our identity, which is rooted deeply in Irish culture. So Goromila Maigov Asukshin. Tamajagol Bogu Orion Ishkuji and Rogerna na Cantragus Cora. We're going to move on to the last thing, which is the Kirkle Cora. Now, I'm going to switch it up a wee bit and maybe just do my thank yous and wrap it up right now, and then give people the chance at the end to go into a conversation session. Basically, I just want to wrap up. I can't have a Lana Gaeilge without giving people the opportunity to speak and listen to Irish. And I'll be putting you all into breakout rooms, so if you don't want to do that, that's no problem. I'm going to wrap up everything else now beforehand, and then it's just going to be a short stint up until about 8:30 to meet new people and use whatever couple focal or maybe listen in. There's no pressure. Again, this is an informal thing, and it just is to kind of pay homage and to highlight the connection that we've made here with Conradh na Gaeilge, Earhart, Massachusetts, that I've kind of inherited when I came over here, and with Glór na Sean, that a committee that I was a founder of, and currently the vice chair of at home. And we have done Kirkle Cores every week since we've got here, and people have got the opportunity to converse and listen in Irish in an informal setting outside a classroom, and be able to make connections basically across the water through the Irish language, which is an amazing and a beautiful thing, and an honour for me to have been able to do. So that's what we're going to do after that. First of all, Mila buejas a go leis na cantere, like some of them have dropped off, but from to Paula to Padraig to Clodagh, Avine, Finnan, agus Maeve, to William, August to Manachan, Fosta, a Soctvet Alahar and Shaw to be here today and to give us such, I really enjoyed it and I thought it was amazing information. I hope everyone else did as well. So just Bully Boston, the Danish like Mila Maihagov, thank you very, very much. And that's kind of on behalf of myself, and Elms and the Irish Cultural Centre as well. Any other thank yous I have to give is just, I'd like to thank my class. I'm going to take this opportunity from the Irish Cultural Centre, who have been so good to me all year and actually dropped off a gift. I did receive it. So Gur Mila Maigov, I really, really appreciate that to everyone here present. And I'd actually like to open up the floor to anyone else who would want to jump in now, just in case they do. No. Garo, would you want to say Musha?
Yeah, just want to say thank you for organizing the day. Every Lough na Gaeilge that we have, we always say the first Saturday in May, you have a choice. You can go to the Kentucky Derby or you can go to Lough na Gaeilge. So I'm glad everybody stayed with Lough na Gaeilge today. And thanks again for organizing everything. It's been a pleasure to have worked with you this year, and also to establish a relationship with Lough Lene and Homa Vishay Ani Asarfat Gese we have the opportunity weekly, as you say, to be able to converse. It's so important to be using the language. So again, thanks for that opportunity.
Gaeilge.
Gaeilge?
Yep, Stephen, so Gaeilge, I say Gaeilge Uachtaráin de Chríomh na Gaeilge and Shaw. Gaeilge is the president of the Conradh na Gaeilge, the branch of the Conradh na Gaeilge and Shaw. So Gur Míle Maigad Gaeilge, thank you very much. And then we'll step in with the chair from Glór na Sean.
Oh, he'd Glór na Sean, Gaeilge, Réaltín, Country Leg, Gur Míle Maigad as an choru, Gur Míle Maigad as an kind of an ólas a firmage and you he've Gaeilge agus Garrod Tire Shoot agus Nadini and Mage Dini atá ag an crunny shot hashi Anna way agus Anna Simul ag éisteach le na ruddy Jeffrey Tire Shoot. So Gur Míle Maigad just sin agus tá some goal and Anna go. So Chief of Mission Sherish, okay. That's sure lagam.
Gur Maigad Stephen.
Gur Maigad.
Gur Maigad. Aine Ella Gaeilge Musta. No, perfect. Well, just Omasha then, just a final thanks to Elms College and to the Irish Cultural Centre. I've had myself, it's kind of wrapping up a year I've had here, so I just want to say thank you. I've had an amazing time. I know Joyce is on the call. Dr. Hampton has been a huge part of that, and there's many other people as well here. So Gur Míle Maigad, thank you very much. Joyce, what was the Gaeilge, or do you want to jump in?
I do. I just wanted to take a moment. What an amazing day. And I'm just so grateful for Réaltín and for Chip for being able to put this together. And Réaltín, it has been such a pleasure to have you as part of the Elms faculty here this year. And I'm able to see the many connections that you've been able to share with students at Elms and the Irish Cultural Centre of Western New England, to be able to make that connection and across the sea, and how wonderful that is. Thank you for all the work. Thank you for doing it with the spirit of love. Thank you.
Oh, thank you so much. Thank you. Okay, Gaeilge, that basically wraps up our Lough Gaeilge. I want to say thanks again. If anyone, my email's been across all the posters, so if anyone wants to get in contact with me about anything, please feel free to do so.